But today, we gotta take a look at how things are progressing. When I saw you yesterday, we see that there is this humanitarian issue going on in Cuba. We were talking about how, yes, we have this interest in Cuba. It fulfills all these things that we want. But it's not yet time for war. In fact, we're going to see the sitting American president say, we need to calm down. If you want to go and help the Cubans, you'd be taking on a European power. Now, as we've been talking about for the past few days, yes, we want an empire. Yes, we want to expand. But as I've been saying, we have to be careful. You can't just do whatever you want. Cuba is owned by Spain. If you want to get involved in Cuba, you're going to have issues with Spain, a European power. What we're going to see is the sitting president at this time says, I want to be certain that war is our last option. President McKinley is going to call in the Spanish diplomat to the White House, a man by the name of Enrique Delome. He sits down with Delome and he says, what we have is just a huge misunderstanding. What you're doing in Cuba is humanitarily, it's morally reprehensible. You have herded hundreds of thousands of Cubans into these internment camps. You're holding them against their will. And you run out of food, you run out of medical supplies, you have people dying at your hand, and something has to change. But we're going to let you fix it. We don't want to get involved. This is your colony. If you truly are the empire that you say you are, you need to fix the problem. But I don't want to get involved. What McKinley says is we can still use diplomacy here. We can still talk through our problems. We don't have to act irrationally. We do have time. Now, what we're going to see is Delome's going to leave this meeting, and he thinks McKinley has basically shown all his cards. Delome's going to write a letter back to Spain. He writes a letter back to the king, and he has some very choice words about McKinley. Unfortunately for Delome, this letter gets intercepted. This letter is intercepted by, most likely, someone who is probably working potentially for another European power. It was probably a British spy working in the United States that gets his hands on this letter, and he's reading through it, and he says, well, isn't this an interesting turn of events? The letter that he reads through, like I say, has very choice words about President McKinley. And this probably British agent says, where can this letter do the most damage? Where can this letter be, in fact, known to the public? Now, I will tell you, this British agent did probably have some options. He probably could have handed it off to McKinley, but then you have all sorts of issues about a British spy working in the United States. So you probably don't want to give it off to the government. Why not just give it to the group who is really pushing for war? Why not just give it to the New York newspapers? Let them print it. This letter is going to call President McKinley too weak to go to war. And if he does, in fact, want to go to war, President McKinley is too stupid to run this war properly. This Spanish ambassador believes in his heart of hearts that McKinley has shown him everything, but by saying he wants to talk out the problems, that he doesn't want war. when this letter gets to the New York newspapers, they're going to print it, basically word for word. When this is called out, the American people take this as a personal affront, that this European power is saying that we are too weak and too stupid to ever actually go to war. Now, so many of you were saying earlier, it's time for war already. Now is it time for war? McKinley's a long-time politician. When this is printed in the newspapers, he tells the American public, I've been doing this a long time. I've been called worse. It's not time for war. We need to step back. Now I have to ask, because Samantha, you were so brave before. You said it wasn't time for war just yet. Now is it time for war?
I mean, yeah.
Why is that?
Because now they're like offended. So they're trying to prove them wrong.
Sure.
You know, they can do them.
Sure, absolutely. We've been called out here. So Samantha, are you going to say now it's time for war? Maybe not yet. Even McKinley says, you know what? I want to avoid war at all costs. In fact, I want to avoid war by accident. We need to do something to be certain that war doesn't come. McKinley's going to order a U.S. warship, one of our brand new battleships, down to Cuba. He's going to send the battleship Maine, but he is going to, in fact, before they even leave port, he tells the Spanish, I promise, this ship is not going to Cuba as a warship. This ship is going to Cuba as a transport ship. It's a taxi. I'm sending the battleship Maine down to Cuba to get every American that's left in Cuba out of there. I want to be certain that every American citizen that's in Cuba gets out. Now, let me ask you this. Why do you think he says we need to get every U.S. citizen out of Cuba right now? What's he trying to avoid here? What happens if we have an American citizen in Cuba die at the hand of Wheeler? Say it one more time, what was it, Chase? Then you have to get involved. Then there's American blood spilled in Cuba. What McKinley's doing here is basically trying to avoid war by accident. If you have one American citizen injured in this conflict, dead in this conflict, now you have to get involved. McKinley sends the USS Maine down to Cuba to pick up any Americans that might be left. We're going to find out very shortly, though, that perhaps what he does here, even though it was well-intentioned, it's going to be what starts the war. Floating off the coast of Cuba, we have the USS Maine, this American battleship that McKinley had said, no, this is just there to pick up any Americans left. In the middle of the night, and near 90 miles off the coast of Florida, there is this massive explosion. The USS Maine is going to blow up in Havana Harbor. This explosion is so big, people in Florida say they could hear it and then see the smoke going up over the horizon. It's huge. Who must have been responsible? It must have been the Spanish. Now let me tell you, we're going to find out fairly quickly that this class of battleship has a fairly serious design flaw. Its coal room, its fuel supply is just piles and piles of coal. coal in and of itself is fairly stable. But when you keep coal in a very tight, confined area, actually when it starts kind of hitting against each other, it creates coal dust that is fantastically flammable. Right next to the fuel room is the armory. Piles upon piles of these gigantic 100-pound battleship shells. They're probably about, give or take, about that tall, about that big around. This ship carries about 100 of them. Do we see a potential problem here? Everything seems good. One spark in the fuel room goes. That fuel room goes, everything in the armory goes. It's a huge explosion. Today, most likely, the battleship Maine explodes because of an accident. But in 1898, who must be responsible? It must have been the Spanish. Who else could it possibly have been? When the Maine explodes, we now have American sailors dead in Havana Harbor. We have 266 Americans dead in Cuba. Now is it time for war? Even McKinley's going to say there's nothing else we can do to avoid war at this point. Now we don't really have a choice. We need to figure out who did this. The New York newspapers get involved. They start offering a reward for any information on who was responsible for this attack on the battleship Maine. They offer $50,000 in 1898 dollars. Today, that's about $1.5 million for any information on who could have been responsible. These New York newspapers get flooded with people saying, I saw who did it. I was in Havana. Someone in the middle of the night was sneaking on board the USS Maine. And he looked Spanish. Okay, well, there are a lot of people that look Spanish. Can you give us more information? I said, yes. He had dark hair and dark eyes. So it must have been the Spanish. People are coming out of the woodworks, saying anything they can. Every single story is linked to the Spanish. Is there any point there where you can turn around now? The rally cry goes up. Remember the Maine. To hell with Spain. We are going to have a situation where now even McKinley says it's time for war. But it's not the president who gets to declare war. That's not his power. We have it written out in the Constitution. It's someone else's power to declare war. Who gets to declare war? Not just the Senate and the House. Congress is going to declare war overwhelmingly. We are going to start this war in kind of a strange place.